The message arrived at 11:47 p.m., the kind of hour when the world pretends it's asleep, while some homes stay wide awake with fear. I was sitting at my kitchen counter, nursing a mug of tea I'd reheated twice, pretending I was unwinding after a long day of voice work. My phone rarely buzzed this late. When it did, it was usually a client rescheduling, or my sister sending a meme at the worst possible time. But this vibration felt different. Too sharp. Too urgent. Unknown number. 2 lines on the screen. Please help. He's hurting my mom. I think I texted the wrong person, but I don't know who else to tell. For a second, I just stared. My brain did that stupid thing it does when reality hits too hard. It looked for an explanation that didn't hurt. Spam. A prank. A scam. Then another message appeared, shorter, like the sender's hands were shaking. He took her phone. He said if I scream, he'll break her neck. My stomach dropped. I read it again, slower this time, as if rereading could change the words into something harmless. It didn't. I typed back with my thumb hovering like it weighed 100 pounds. Who is this? Are you safe? Where are you? No response for 10 seconds. 20. Then, I'm in the laundry closet. I can hear him. My tea went cold in my hands. I should tell you something now, before you assume what I assumed in that first minute. That phone didn't belong to me. It belonged to Gideon Cross, a man who didn't give out his number unless you had power, money, or secrets. A man the city called a philanthropist on magazine covers, and something much darker in whispers. Gideon Cross was the kind of powerful man whose name made people step back without knowing why. The kind of man who could buy a building, bury a scandal, or make a problem disappear before the sunrise. And somehow, by accident, a child's cry for help had landed in his pocket. Because I wasn't holding my own phone. I was holding his. I was at his penthouse recording a private narration job, an expensive documentary voiceover that would never air publicly. A midnight contract. One of those gigs you don't ask too many questions about if you want to keep getting paid. I'd stepped into the kitchen for a break when his phone, left charging near the sink, buzzed. I glanced at it automatically, and then I'd seen the words that made my chest tighten. I didn't know what Gideon would do with a message like that. I didn't even know if he'd care. But I knew one thing. A child hiding in a closet didn't have time for me to debate morality. I grabbed the phone, my fingers suddenly clumsy, and ran back toward the studio room where Gideon sat behind a glass desk, reviewing paperwork like the night was just another business meeting. He looked up when I entered too fast. Everything okay? He asked, calm as still water. I swallowed, forcing my voice steady. Someone just texted your number. A little girl. She says someone is hurting her mother. He didn't move at first. Not even a blink. Just that quiet, watchful stillness. Then he stood, slowly, took the phone from my hand and read. I watched his face for a reaction. Anything. A frown. Disbelief. Annoyance. Instead, I saw something colder than anger. Focus. He typed 3 words with no hesitation. I'm coming. Stay quiet. He didn't ask if it was real. Didn't call it a prank. Didn't ask me what I thought. He walked toward the closet by the door where his coat hung like a uniform. Should we call the police? I asked, my voice trembling with the weight of it. He paused, just long enough to turn his head. Not yet, he said. If he's already violent, sirens could turn a beating into a murder. My heart hammered. Then what are you going to do? He put on his coat. The movement was smooth, practiced, as if he'd worn urgency like this before. I'm going to answer, he said quietly. And then, to me, like he was assigning a role in a mission I never asked for. You're coming too. My mouth went dry. Me. He looked at me again, and for the first time I noticed something behind his composure. A flicker. Not fear. Memory. He held the phone up, and another message popped in. He's walking around looking for me. Gideon's jaw tightened. He typed, stay in the closet. Breathe slow. What's your name? The reply came like a whisper through glass. Lila. Gideon's thumb hovered. Lila, I'm Gideon. I'm on my way. Keep the door shut. If you can, tell me your address. A long pause. Then the address came through. And when it did, Gideon's eyes sharpened like a blade. because he knew the neighborhood. And he knew what kind of people hid their monsters behind thin walls and locked doors. He walked out, already dialing someone on a second line. Car. Now, he said. I followed, because sometimes fear doesn't stop you. Sometimes it just proves you're alive. As the elevator descended, my own phone buzzed. My sister calling again, probably about nothing. I ignored it. All that mattered was the child named Lila, hiding in darkness, waiting for a stranger to become the only hope she had left. And Gideon Cross, powerful, dangerous, unreadable, was already moving like the night had called him by name. The city looked different at midnight. Streetlights turned every wet road into a ribbon of gold. Storefronts were dark, but apartment windows glowed here and there, little squares of life tucked behind curtains. Gideon's driver didn't speak. The car was quiet except for the soft hum of the engine and the occasional vibration of that phone in Gideon's hand. He held it like it could break. Like the life on the other end might shatter if he gripped too hard. Another text flashed. He's yelling. He says my mom is worthless. I felt my throat tighten. I wanted to reach through the screen and pull Lila into my arms. Gideon typed with his thumb, precise and calm. Listen to me, Lila. You're doing the right thing. Keep breathing. Tell me if you see light under the door. Seconds later. Yes, I can see his shoes. I flinched as if the shoes were in front of me. Gideon's voice stayed level. Turn your body sideways. Put your hands over your mouth. Don't make a sound. He wasn't performing bravery. He was delivering instructions like a man who'd been in rooms where sound meant death. I looked at him, really looked, and realized this wasn't the first time Gideon Cross had chased something terrible through the night. He stared out the window, but his attention was entirely inside that house we hadn't even reached yet. My heart raced with questions. Why would a man like him respond? Why wouldn't he just forward the message to police and return to his quiet luxury? Why was he acting like this was personal? I didn't ask, not yet, because the phone buzzed again. I think my mom stopped crying. That message landed like a stone. Gideon's fingers paused for half a second, then he typed, Lila, can you hear your mom breathing? No answer. The driver turned onto a narrower street. The neighborhood changed, fewer street lights, older buildings, porches with peeling paint. The kind of place where arguments were common enough that neighbors stopped calling them emergencies. Gideon leaned forward. Faster, he said softly. The driver nodded and accelerated. I watched Gideon's knuckles whiten as he gripped the phone. Then, for the first time, his calm cracked. He said, not to me, not to the driver, almost to himself. Not again. The words were small, but they carried decades. And suddenly I understood. Gideon Cross wasn't just going to save a child. He was trying to outrun a ghost. Another buzz. He's coming back. He's opening doors. Gideon typed, stay still. If he opens the closet, shove past and run outside. Can you reach a window? No. It's just shelves and towels. He exhaled once, slow and controlled, as if he was calming himself so he could calm her. Okay. Then you listen to my voice. You're not alone now. The car slowed near the address. A 3-story building with a dead porch light. A narrow driveway. Curtains drawn in most windows. No police. No neighbors outside. No noise from the street. But inside was a child listening for footsteps. We parked half a block away. Gideon opened the door before the car fully stopped. Stay behind me, he told me. My mouth went dry. Gideon, He looked back, and the way he said my name was the first sign he remembered I was human. Clara, he said, if she's real, she's scared. If she's not, we walk away. I forced myself to nod. We moved down the sidewalk. Cold air bit my cheeks. The building smelled faintly of damp wood and old smoke. Gideon held the phone up, reading the last message Lila had sent. And then another one arrived. Just 2 words. He found me. My heart stopped. Gideon didn't run. He didn't curse. He simply moved faster, silent, controlled, like a shadow given direction. He typed as he walked. Lila, look at me in your mind. If you can't hide, make noise, bang something. Scream. I'm at the door. He reached the front entrance. It was slightly open. From inside came a man's voice, slurred, furious. Where are you, you little brat? I felt my skin crawl. Gideon pushed the door open without a sound. He stepped into darkness, and I followed because some nights you don't choose courage. Some nights, courage chooses you. Before I tell you what happened inside that apartment, you need to understand something about Gideon Cross. Because if you don't, none of it will make sense. Gideon didn't become powerful by being kind. He became powerful by being careful. He built a fortune with a reputation for ending conflicts quietly. Sometimes with money, sometimes with leverage, sometimes with consequences that never made the news. People feared him not because he shouted, but because he didn't. And yet a child's message had reached him, and he'd moved like his life depended on it. Why? I didn't know his full story until much later. But that night, as we stood in a dark hallway listening to a man's heavy footsteps inside, the pieces started to reveal themselves, like a truth that couldn't stay buried. We were in the corridor of an old building. A dim bulb flickered above us. Gideon lifted one finger to his lips, silent. A door down the hall was half open. Inside, I heard shattering glass, a woman's muffled cry, then silence again, the kind that isn't peace, the kind that is absence. Gideon's eyes narrowed. He moved forward, placing each step with intention. And as he did, I saw something that chilled me more than the man's voice. Gideon's hand, relaxed at his side, wasn't empty. He carried no gun, no weapon, just a small flashlight and a phone. But the way he held himself was the weapon. We reached the apartment door. It was ajar. A faint metallic smell drifted out, blood, but not fresh gore, more like a room that had been lived in with bruises for a long time. Gideon pushed the door wider. The living room was chaos. A lamp overturned. A coffee table cracked at one corner. Family photos scattered across the floor like they'd been ripped apart in anger. On the couch lay a woman, early 30s, dark hair, her face swollen, eyes closed. Alive. Barely. I covered my mouth, shaking. Gideon knelt beside her, checked her pulse with a gentleness that didn't match his reputation. Then he looked toward the hallway. Heavy footsteps. A man's breathing. "Come out," the man shouted. "I swear to God I'll." His voice broke into a curse and a laugh that made my stomach twist. Gideon rose slowly, like he didn't want to spook the monster into striking harder. The phone buzzed again. A final message from Lila. "If I die, tell my mom I tried." I felt tears sting my eyes. Gideon didn't. He didn't have time. He typed one line. "You won't die. I'm here." And then he stepped forward into the hallway. The man appeared at the far end, wide shoulders, unsteady stance. Drunk, angry, hand-stained. He froze when he saw Gideon. "Who the hell are you?" he barked. Gideon's voice was quiet. "Step away from the child." The man snorted, like Gideon was ridiculous. "This is my house." Gideon's eyes didn't blink. "Not tonight." The man took a step forward, puffing himself up. And something in Gideon's expression changed, not into rage, but into certainty. That's when I realized Gideon Cross didn't come because he was noble. He came because this scene matched a memory he never escaped. Years earlier, Gideon hadn't been Gideon. He'd been Eli Cross, a teenager in a small apartment above a mechanic shop. He had a mother who worked nights and a little brother named Noah who followed him everywhere. One winter night, a neighbor's fight spilled through thin walls, shouting, glass, a gunshot that everyone pretended they didn't hear. Eli ran next door. Too late. He found Noah on the floor in the hallway, caught by violence that wasn't meant for him. Noah survived, but the damage was permanent brain trauma, seizures, a life that would never be normal again. And Eli learned the lesson the world teaches some children too early. Help doesn't always arrive, unless you become the kind of man who can force it to. Eli grew up, changed his name, built power like armor, and promised himself he'd never be helpless again. And now, decades later, a girl named Lila had texted the wrong phone and landed on the one man in the city who could not ignore a child trapped in the echo of his own past. The man's name, I would learn later, was Trent Maddox. But that night, he was just a shadow with hands that shook from drink and cruelty. He took another step toward Gideon. "This isn't your business," Trent slurred. "You leave, or I make you." Gideon didn't move. Behind me, the woman on the couch made a faint sound. Pain. Breath. Life. Gideon's voice stayed calm. Where is Lila? Trent laughed, ugly and loud. She ran. Brat thinks she can call someone. My stomach turned. So he knew. He knew she'd reached out. Gideon took a step forward, and it was amazing how one step could feel like a storm arriving. Trent's smile faltered. Last time, Gideon said softly. Where is she? Trent lifted his fist, like he thought intimidation could win. Gideon moved. I can't describe it like an action movie, because it wasn't flashy. It was efficient. A shift of weight. A grip on Trent's wrist. A twist that turned anger into a gasp. Trent hit the hallway wall with a thud, his arm pinned, his breath knocked out. Stop, I whispered without meaning to. Gideon didn't even look back. Clara, he said, voice still calm, call an ambulance. Now, tell them domestic assault. 3rd floor. Hurry. I fumbled for my phone with shaking hands. Trent tried to swing his free arm, but Gideon blocked it like he'd trained for this 1,000 times. Where is she? Gideon repeated, each word spaced like a countdown. Trent spat a curse. Kitchen. She's in the kitchen closet. Gideon held him there for one breath longer, then shoved him backward into a wall and stepped past him. Stay down, he warned, deadly quiet. If you stand up, you'll regret it. Gideon ran, silent, down the hall and into the kitchen. I followed at a distance, phone pressed to my ear, describing the address to the dispatcher with my voice cracking. In the kitchen, cabinets hung crooked. A chair lay on its side. Gideon crouched beside a narrow pantry door. Lila, he called softly, it's Gideon. Open the door. No answer. He knocked once, gentle. Sweetheart. It's okay. I'm here. A tiny sound like a sob swallowed. Then the door creaked open an inch. A small face appeared. Pale, eyes huge, cheeks streaked with tears. Lila. She looked at Gideon like he was a myth. You really came, she whispered. Gideon's expression softened in a way that made my chest ache. I told you I would, he said. She stepped out, trembling, barefoot in pajamas. Her hands were shaking so hard she couldn't even wipe her tears. Is my mom, she started. Gideon knelt to her level. She's alive. Help is coming. Lila's lips quivered. He said he'd kill her. Gideon's voice dropped, steady and certain. He won't. Behind us, Trent's footsteps scraped in the hall. He was trying to get up. Gideon stood, placing himself between Lila and the doorway like a wall made of will. Clara, he said without looking at me, take her to the living room. Keep her with her mother. Don't let her see him. My hand shook as I reached for Lila. She grabbed my sweater like she was holding on to the only solid thing in the world. I guided her out, heartbreaking at how light she felt, like fear had eaten half her childhood already. In the living room, I sat her beside her mother. The woman's eyes fluttered, but didn't open. Lila touched her mother's hand and whispered, Mom, I tried. I tried. And then, because children are braver than we deserve, she looked up at me and asked, is he going to hurt us again? I swallowed, forcing my voice steady the way Gideon had. No, I promised. Not tonight. In the hallway, Gideon's voice rose for the first time, still controlled, but with a cold edge. Trent was pleading now. Look, man, it got out of hand. Gideon cut him off. You don't get to explain your way out of terrorizing a child. The sirens in the distance began to wail. Trent's face turned pale as he realized police were coming. He took one step toward the door. Gideon blocked him. And I understood then. Gideon Cross didn't need to kill Trent. He needed Trent to face consequences. Because redemption isn't always blood. Sometimes redemption is choosing not to become the monster you're fighting. The police arrived first, then the paramedics. The apartment flooded with harsh light and fast voices. Radios crackled. Boots thudded on wood floors. I stayed on the couch with Lila, holding her small hand while an EMT checked her mother's vitals. Lila didn't cry anymore. Not because she was okay, because she was exhausted. She leaned against me like a bird with broken wings and whispered. I thought nobody would answer. The EMT lifted her mother onto a stretcher. Ma'am, he said to Lila gently, we're taking your mom to the hospital. You can come. Lila looked around wildly. I don't have anyone. Gideon stepped into the room. Clara will ride with you, he said, and I'll meet you there. The police officer approached Gideon, eyeing him like he recognized power even without a badge. Sir, we'll need your statement. Gideon nodded once. You'll have it. The officer glanced at Trent, now handcuffed and cursing. Victim's partner? Not anymore, Gideon said, voice flat. As they led Trent out, he twisted his head toward Lila, eyes wild. You little. Gideon moved faster than the officer could react. He stepped between Trent and Lila, gaze like ice. Trent stopped mid-sentence. He didn't finish the threat. Because something about Gideon, something silent and absolute, told him this. There are worse things than handcuffs. The ambulance door shut. I climbed in with Lila and squeezed her hand as the vehicle started moving. She stared at the ceiling lights, whispering like she was afraid to believe in tomorrow. My mom always said real heroes don't exist. I swallowed tears. Maybe she just hasn't met the right kind yet. At the hospital, the waiting room smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. Lila sat curled in a chair, watching nurses move like ghosts. A social worker approached me. Is there a family member we can call? Lila shook her head before I could answer. My grandma is dead. My dad is dead. The words were so simple, too heavy for a child. I looked up, and there was Gideon walking into the waiting room as if he owned the building, but his eyes were only on Lila. He knelt in front of her. Lila, he said softly, I need you to listen to me. Your mom is going to get help. She's going to wake up, and you're going to be safe. Lila stared at him, eyes glassy. Why did you come? Gideon hesitated. It was the first time I saw him hesitate. Not because he didn't know what to do, but because he didn't know how to explain the truth without breaking. Because, he said finally, someone I loved once needed help and I couldn't get there in time. Lila's lip trembled. Did they die? Gideon's eyes flickered with pain. Not exactly, but the night changed everything. Lila reached out, tiny fingers, and touched his hand. Then you came for me so it wouldn't happen again. Gideon exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. Yes, he whispered. Exactly that. The social worker returned, cautious. Sir, are you related? Gideon stood. No, but I'll make sure she's not alone. He handed the worker a card with a name and number. The worker blinked when she read it. Her posture changed instantly. Respect, maybe even fear. And I realized again that power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet guarantee. Lila's mother survived surgery. She woke up the next afternoon, disoriented, voice hoarse. When she saw Lila, she cried and tried to sit up. Lila climbed into the bed carefully and whispered, Mom. I texted someone. I'm sorry. Her mother's eyes widened. Who? Lila looked toward the corner where Gideon stood, hands in pockets, posture still. The powerful man, she said. And for the first time, Sarah Peterson looked at Gideon Cross. Not as a savior, as a question. Because no one like him shows up by accident. Not unless fate is making a point. 6 months later, Lila's world looked different. Not perfect, but safer. Sarah moved them into a brighter apartment with working locks and neighbors who actually waved hello. Trent Maddox didn't come back. A restraining order was in place. Charges were filed. And for once, the system didn't look away, because Gideon Cross made sure it didn't. I wish I could tell you Gideon became a saint overnight. He didn't. He was still a man built from sharp edges and hard choices. But something had shifted. On Sundays, he visited like a quiet ritual. He never arrived with flashy gifts. He arrived with groceries, with books, with board games, with presents. Lila started calling him Mr. G, like he was a teacher she respected. Sarah didn't trust him at first. She shouldn't have. But trust isn't built by words. It's built by consistency. One evening, I visited them too because somehow I'd become part of the thread tying this story together. Lila was doing homework at the table. Sarah was making tea. Gideon stood at the window, looking out like he was still learning how to be inside a peaceful room. Sarah cleared her throat. I never asked you, she said carefully, why you really came. Gideon's gaze stayed on the street. A child asked, he replied. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Many children ask. Most people don't answer. Silence stretched. Then Gideon spoke, voice low. When I was young, my brother was hurt because nobody intervened. I spent years building a life where I could control chaos. He turned slightly. And then your daughter texted me. Sarah's voice softened. Wrong number. Gideon nodded. Wrong number, he repeated. Right message. Lila looked up from her homework, eyes bright. I knew it was you, she said. Even when I didn't know your face. Gideon's expression softened. How? Lila shrugged. Because you typed like you weren't afraid. Gideon smiled, barely. I was terrified. Lila blinked. But you came anyway. Gideon's throat moved like he swallowed something heavy. Yes, he said. I came anyway. Sarah set down her mug. You changed our lives. Gideon shook his head. No. Lila did. She chose to reach out. Lila frowned. I just texted. Gideon crouched near her chair. You did the bravest thing someone can do, he told her. You asked for help. Lila stared, processing that like it was new math. Then she smiled. So, I'm like a hero too. Gideon's eyes softened. Yes, he said. You are. A week later, I learned Gideon had quietly set up a fund. Legal, clean, anonymous at first, covering Sarah's therapy, Lila's school, and a future college account. He didn't do it for credit. He did it like he was paying a debt to the past. And one night, when I asked him why he let me witness all of it, why he pulled me into a situation that could have been dangerous, he answered with a sentence I still think about. Because he said, someone has to tell the story right. I'm telling it now. Because sometimes the wrong number is the only number that matters. Sometimes a child's cry reaches the one person who can't ignore it. And sometimes the most powerful man in the city isn't powerful because he can destroy. He's powerful because when it counts, he chooses to protect.